Our last panel, the moderator for the last panel is our Dean for the Center for Naval Warfare Studies, Professor Barney Rubel.
Okay, good afternoon. We're almost there. Last panel, the second day. I want to take just a second to say that I thought that this CSF has been especially good. The speakers have been tremendous, and yeah. And I don't know if there's an opportunity later, so I want to take this time to personally thank Captain Mike Sherlock. He's the guy that put this together along with members of our faculty, including Andy Stigler, Jonathan Pollack, Professor John Maurer, and then our chief logistician for the whole thing, Karen Sellers, our special events officer, and then Commander Kevin Caney, too. These folks have done a wonderful job putting this together, especially since we're in the expeditionary mode over here at the Hyatt. I probably should have said that while the Commandant was still here, huh? Well, look, this is the last panel of the last day, and it's the last event before graduation for this year. So I think it's useful to look back or look at the business of this last panel as synthesis on kind of three levels. First of all, CSF is a sort of a synthesis event for our students to bring together what they've learned during this academic year. Secondly, this panel, as the last panel of this CSF, is an opportunity for all of us to synthesize what we've heard from the very excellent preceding panels. And in terms of this topic itself, for instance, smart power, according to the 2007 CSIS report on the subject by Richard Armitage and Joseph Nye, they define smart power as literally a synthesis of hard and soft power. So I think synthesis is a good watchword for this panel. I suppose that an early expression of the synthesis of hard and soft power was TR's injunction to walk softly and carry a big stick. That's all well and good, but you know, how exactly do we do this? How do we achieve this synthesis? Now, I will say that our maritime strategy really represents a maritime instantiation of the synthesis of credible combat power and the regionally distributed and mission-tailored forces that we put out there to generate a global maritime partnership, prevent war, render humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, all the while keeping a Navy that is highly combat capable and can respond to any contingency that the nation might suffer. All well and good. But in the spirit of being provocative, I guess, let me take some shots at the topic for this panel. In my view, characterizing forms of national power as hard or soft is to invoke metaphors, and thus it should raise certain caution flags in us when we start talking in this way. Moreover, attaching the word smart a priori to a certain formula for applying national power presupposes quite a bit. A friend of mine, Colin Gray, in England says that anytime you hear some new term or some term applied to military power like balanced or flexible, you should consider its antonym. And if it doesn't make much sense, then it makes you wonder about what meaning the term itself has. So I'll lay this down as kind of a gauntlet for our panelists, and they will hopefully help us make sense of these terms so that we can form our own opinions and our own synthesis. Our panelists, fortunately, are well qualified for the task. I'm not going to go in. It is late. I won't go into their individual resumes in the interest of time. You've got them in your packets. But I will point out that all three of these panelists have occupied important government positions, as well as being highly successful and noted academics. Their comments, therefore, should command our attention. We're not going to go on in the order that's listed in your program. We're going to start with Dr. Patrick Cronin, then we'll go to Dr. O'Hanlon, and then Dr. Mahnken will finish up for us. So, Dr. Cronin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here in Newport. I could hardly not be here when I was asked by my old friend Admiral Weisskopf whether I could possibly fill in for another old friend, Admiral Stavridis, who had to go to great lengths of being confirmed as SACEUR to escape this panel. Admiral Weisskopf is one of the great strategic thinkers who also is a military operator with outstanding credentials, and I just have the highest regard for him and his family. The only reason I was able to really come, though, is because I was in the middle of exercises with our Pakistani partners. But fortunately, Professor Tim Hoyt is down there taking my place right now from the Naval War College, so thank you doubly so, Phil. Let me try to put this panel topic into a policy context. After all, I've lived most of my life in Washington, D.C., so it's hard for me to escape the policy world, and pose the fundamental question as this. It's one I've really spent my life on. It's how can the United States better use its influence in a changing world, both for the protection of U.S. national interests, but also increasingly for the protection of global international security interests. So let me first say a few words about power and maybe build on the Nye Armitage study. Just briefly, clearly when the Obama administration officials have been coming to power, and you've heard some of them here today, I think Emery Slaughter, among others, talk about power, increasingly they always talk about comprehensive power, integrated whole of government power. So the first thing is that people recognize that, yes, just as Joe Nye did in his many studies, look at power as a continuum, not really just different discrete types of power. Going back to Colin Gray, you really can't separate power as power at some basic level here. And it is part of a continuum, even while you know you need comprehensive power to address a lot of the issues that we're grappling with today, from Iran and North Korea, Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan, to global climate change and piracy and energy security and on and on. But you don't need just comprehensive power. It has to be not just coordinated, which is what we do in Washington ad nauseum. We can have meetings until the end of time, but we don't really integrate. You know, we use the stapler more than we do the brain. We staple different position papers together rather than integrate. Now, my colleagues here on this panel are, you know, exceptions to that. They're the people who try to help us integrate these, but too little of that work goes on. We're just talking about how it's very interesting to see Dennis Ross moving from being the Iran czar over the State Department to the long-range strategy czar over at the National Security Council. I hope that's true. It's also telling that it's taken 6 months to fill the position to do the long-range strategy at the National Security Council, where presumably you're trying to bring this together. Afghanistan and Pakistan provide a very specific high priority for the administration as they reviewed strategies to look not just at comprehensive power, but at power that will be used both simultaneously and sequentially. So simultaneously, the administration is consciously thinking about how to make sure that, as General McChrystal tries to get a coordinated, comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan, and Richard Holbrooke tries to coordinate this in a regional context, that it's moving together at the same time as economic development and as diplomacy. That's the theory. But there's also recognition that this has to be phased, that there has to be synchronization to avoid a conflict. For instance, again, just this morning, what are the Pakistani generals most worried about? They're most worried about a lack of synchronization between their crackdown in Swat Valley and maybe in South and North Waziristan to come this summer, and the operations that are coming in Afghanistan to try to put the Taliban in a squeeze in Kandahar and Helmand and in South and East Afghanistan. All of this power, though, has to be not just sequential or simultaneous and comprehensive. It has to be embedded in a strategy. Everything ultimately comes down to a political objective, and we have to remember that. So as we try to reduce a task to a specific achievable objective, like exit Iraq with a capable Iraqi military, we have to make sure that the political objective is realistic. It's based on the facts on the ground, so that when we're balancing various sectarian groups, Kurdish, Shiite, Sunni, that we're not setting up something that will be a recipe for civil war 5 or 10 years down the line. So there's a strategy. What is our political strategy ultimately for this? And that's going to take the things that we do for a living. It's going to take adequate measurement and assessment, and putting that assessment back into policy, and putting it into the Naval War College and our joint professional military education system in terms of education and training, putting it into civilian universities, putting it into our ultimate force structure and policies. Anyway, let me move on from that sort of preamble on power to what kind of world are we trying to exercise power in? Now, we've just finished a global strategic assessment, I'm happy to say, something that Tom Mahnken's office commissioned from me last year, and probably was expecting last year. But I'm happy to say it should be up on our website in the next week or two, assuming OSD has given us the final clearance. But in that, we look at the daunting array of challenges I've already suggested. They're challenges that are well documented. One book I'd recommend would be David Sanger's book, The Inheritance, and he just picks up the big 5 problems that the Obama administration has had to grapple with, for sure, on Iran and North Korea, Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and saying, look at these huge tectonic plates that are moving and that the U.S. Is going to try to be managing for security. And yet, that's just a very limited agenda. Today's crises really are rooted in a couple of major trends. And they're trends that someone like Deputy Secretary Jim Steinberg has talked about. We really face rising power centers. And there are 2 types of rising power centers that are almost a contradiction. Because some of these rising power centers are indeed rising power centers like Russia, Brazil, India, China, competing with an American-dominated power system in general. But on the other side of that, the rise of non-state actors, which really is another way of saying that state power is shrinking. It's not disappearing, the state's not disappearing. The problem here is that we face this complex world in which globalization and geopolitics coexist. And anytime we focus on just the geopolitics, we're probably going to be bitten by the globalization that we're avoiding, for good or ill. And conversely, if we just focus on global challenges, we'll probably miss some good old-fashioned geopolitics. So we have to balance this complex world that we're in. In our study, and Paul Giara is here, and he played a Herculean role in sort of pulling together 125 cats, 125 voices, extraordinarily bright people that I pulled together looking at 8 global trends and 7 regional surveys and the U.S. strategies. But the 8 global trends, and I'll just read off the headlines, they're nothing new to you, but it starts to think about, all right, you want to go to the White House and you want to try to use U.S. influence to improve national and international security. What does that world look like? Well, first of all, there's a global redistribution of economic power, and there's great uncertainty about the future of economic power. I mean, look at what's going on right now on the margins of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting with Russia and Iran, China, trying to create an alternative to the dollar. So we are on the cusp of, but not yet in a multipolar world. So there's a second trend of evolving political power, the political power shift that I've already mentioned. American power still being primus inter pares, first among equals, but in fact reduced relative to its heyday in the past. Thirdly, the globalization of communications, something that the Iranian government is trying to grapple with right now in trying to suppress, and they probably will, in my estimations, be able to suppress the social revolution that would probably come about if they didn't suppress it, they didn't wield the hard power tools of government to try to keep a revolution from evolving around the stolen election from Mousavi. The fourth trend of energy and the environment insecurity reaching a tipping point, if not this year or this decade, clearly over the horizon in our lifetimes. The era of cheap hydrocarbons and scant ecological regard is finished. And so we are facing a watershed, and these have profound security implications. Fifth, since 9/11, the growing insecurity in Afghanistan and Pakistan or Yemen, and Somalia remind us of the growing challenge posed by fragile states and ungoverned spaces, and the peril of leaving not just the bottom billion, it's more than Collier's bottom billion, and some 60 countries left behind in dire poverty since this financial crisis has taken a stranglehold on the world economy. So this is a growing source of instability. Sixth, transnational terrorism and stateless actors inflicting potentially unprecedented damage that we will have to guard against is catastrophic terrorism. And it's a very sobering thing when you think about how easy it is to get through the Proliferation Security Initiative. So even with the best cooperation, it's going to be very difficult to try to stop not just fissile and nuclear material, but wait till we get to biological materials in the future with life sciences. The seventh, the changing character of war, forcing a concern about, yes, I'm sure Colin Gray doesn't like the term hybrid warfare, but for brevity's sake, the point is that we can no longer assume war will happen in a straightforward dimension, that even major actors are likely to pursue asymmetric advantages just as they always have in war, so this is nothing new. But the ability for non-state actors or smaller states or state and non-state actors working together to work across a very horizontal battlefield, not a physical one, cyber, space, into the global commons, this is a new and growing dimension of future warfare. And finally, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, again, making it increasingly possible that nuclear or biological weapons may be used in the coming years. So if you think about that set of trends, and then think about, my goodness, how much influence can we really wield in this world? How powerful are we really? We don't really have that power. I mean, it's the first piece of recognition, just how complex this is. So it's recognizing our limits, and we're going to have to exercise our power differently. We're going to have to be as clever as the fox, keeping our eye on multiple challenges and taking care not to exert our finite resources and legitimacy on a single problem. Or if we do focus on a single problem, we better be aware that we're neglecting a whole other set of issues. Clearly, we need more than military power for this in the world. The problem there is that we have not properly invested in our non-kinetic forms of power, and this is something you've heard from Secretary Gates, you've heard from many officials in previous administration, from this administration, and it's recognized. So how do we start to create a permanent civilian capacity, including with development and diplomacy? How do we start to increasingly integrate economics and security, as well as energy and environment? There, we're only beginning to do this well in terms of whether it's intelligence or policy or the White House. We have a long way to go to integrate economics and security. The President's speech in Cairo earlier this month built on earlier statements trying to turn a narrative, tell a story, reminded of the Daniel Pink book about a whole new brain, where he says, you know, increasingly the value added is not in your left brain analytic thinking, which is what we do for a living, but the right brain, being able to tell a story, being able to empathize and understand the other actors out there, being able to give meaning and context to events. That's what we're all trying to do here. And on power, the President was trying to give meaning and context in a story, a compelling narrative to counter what had been an increasingly anti-American story that had taken hold in many parts of the world, including parts of the Muslim world. And I think so far he's done that. He even had a tough love message for our ally Israel in terms of settlement freezes. So there were various messages there that he's trying to change the story and the narrative on. Unfortunately, that's in many ways the easy part. Now that you've changed the story, how can you fill that space in that time to take advantage of the opportunity now that may be created for this smarter use of power to work? And in some ways, I think the administration has adopted classical Chinese strategy, although Jonathan may want to challenge me on this. First of all, in the recent Chinese strategy, I mean, ever since Deng Xiaoping's opening 30 years ago, has been built around peace on the periphery with all of its neighbors. In many ways, the Obama administration has started with a similar tack of saying, let's make as much of an overture, an opening, and holding out our hand in friendship as we can with everybody. Now, we've seen it already spurned by a couple of well-known actors in North Korea and Iran, but the point is the United States has turned its image around in terms of showing that it's at least seeking diplomacy. In another way, we are changing our approach here, and this is my sort of final set of points here on how will the administration continue to try to recalibrate American influence, U.S. influence in the world. I think one pillar of it has been to focus on getting our own house in order. Here, I think the central issue has been our economic welfare, and reading headlines like President Obama can't sleep at night because he's worried about the deficit. I mean, that could be spin, but it's also happens to be true for anybody who looks at our balance sheet. It's not a positive development. It's not just our economy, though, it's also our legitimacy. So the intention to close Guantanamo, to take on these issues of the perception that America has lost legitimacy, is also part of the get well package of policy. And then finally, turning investments, what investments we can, into our long-term capacity, whether it's our human capacity, or it's our infrastructural capacity, or our international institutional capacity. I think that's part of the strategy as well. The second dimension of this new approach has been to redefine problems. So even although disrupted now by Iranian and North Korean testing, there's no doubt that trying to turn the non-proliferation agenda to talk about a world without nuclear weapons, it was at least an attempt, the speech in Prague, to try to change the discussion. Similarly on Afghanistan and Pakistan, change the discussion in terms of a regional context. Change it in terms of even Afghanistan, in terms of a really comprehensive policy. Thirdly, there's been the discussion I've mentioned already in terms of comprehensive civilian capacity building, the 3 Ds of development, diplomacy, and defense working together. Fourthly, there's been a lot of focus on exercising strategic restraint. So you heard in people like Secretary Clinton's testimony when she was confirmed about force as a last resort. There's been this presumption, again, that the United States should be, again, this is where we should be adopting the classical Chinese strategy of Sun Tzu, of trying to develop strategies that where we win whole in terms of our objectives, in terms of our resources intact. That's a clever way to win. Now, that may not be an option, unfortunately. That may be too good a world for the one we're actually in. So then the question becomes, all right, well, how can we at least try to work in that direction? And this leads me to my final point, which is we have to focus on, to steal a term from my wife's work on counterterrorism, we have to work on counter-mobilization. And I don't mean it just in terms of working the terrorism issue. But we have to wield our power in a way that maximally influences not only our allies and partners to do more. And again, I'm very heartened by what I've seen these last couple of days about what the Pakistanis are doing inside Pakistan, where we're not on the ground. What happens on the ground in Pakistan is totally dependent on the Pakistanis. And they are actually now exhibiting both political will and a learning curve on how to exercise comprehensive power, not just military power, and maybe this will create a better space in a year or two in Pakistan. Maybe not, but this at least is a hopeful sign. But we also have to mobilize other states. We have to prevent major states from becoming spoilers. We have to prevent even potential adversaries from trying to have enough space to spoil a regional setting. So here you're trying to isolate actors, and that's another reason why we've reached out with diplomacy. If we can isolate bad actors and minimize the circle of countries and actors who are going to support them, then we've reduced our problem. We've reduced our transaction costs. We also have to do this with non-state actors, something I'm sure Emery Slaughter has talked about. Increasingly, we have to mobilize both friendly sort of non-state actors, whether it's NGO or private security in the field, but also non-state actors who are important actors in regions and in states. And in places like Afghanistan, it's trying to distinguish reconcilable versus irreconcilable, as General Petraeus likes to put it. In conclusion, because time is so brief, the United States can recalibrate its power, not just, as Professor Rubel said, by Roosevelt, speaking softly and carry a big stick, although that's probably still good advice. It's been tested over time. But rather to take the heading of this panel, and let me reformulate it, we should be trying to wield power smartly. We'll have to use our hard power softly. We'll have to invest in more soft power so that we can use it vigorously. And we need to integrate both strategically. Thank you.
It's an honor to be here today. Patrick's done a great job framing our subject for the panel. I want to just say a few specific things that I believe build on what he said and try to talk a little bit about how we actually do recalibrate some of our tools and our resources. And because it's always more fun to speak to an audience and say things it might not want to hear, I'm going to focus on not only why I agree with many of Secretary Gates's proposed cuts, but why I think we actually need a few more, and why it's important actually to figure out how the Department of Defense can make do with a bit less, not in terms of how we treat our people, our warriors, our deployed forces in the field. And I like General Conway's points along these lines very much during his address, but more in terms of planning and in terms of figuring out ways in which the Department of Defense can make do with a bit less hedging against future possibilities. Now, I don't mean to sound complacent, and I don't suggest that we become that way, but I want to propose a few more bold ideas. I hope this is the right place to do it. In fact, I know it's the right place because Newport is famous for this. Not only does it have probably the best forum of any war college in the country today, but I would argue it probably has the best history. And one of the things that Newport always did well, and the Naval War College always did well, was to assume that the country wasn't necessarily making great choices just because we're a great country. That in fact, at many points in our history, we make a lot of bad choices. And we should assume we're probably not getting our choices right today. After all, as one way of motivating this point, and I want to go through sort of a 2-minute thumbnail sketch of the last 100 years to make this motivating argument and then get into my proposed budget cuts in the weeds. But in this decade, it took us 4 years to figure out even first principles about how to do counterinsurgency correctly. And then, of course, we become the best country in the history of counterinsurgency. You know, we're a nation of extremes. And it's true. I think we fought Iraq very badly and Afghanistan very badly for several years. And now we have the best toolkit of anybody in the history of colonialism, empire building, nation building, stabilization missions, whatever you want to call them at whatever stage in history. We're very good at it. But it took us 4 or 5 years. And a lot of our fellow Americans had to suffer and pay the ultimate price as a learning process for the country as a whole to come to the right tactics, the right methods, the right resource allocation. I promised you my 2-minute sketch through history. Back in the 1920s, Newport was thinking about carrier warfare. Newport was thinking about amphibious assault. Almost nobody else was. Other people wanted to build battleships. Other people wanted to not worry about defense at all, go out and enjoy the 1920s, et cetera, et cetera. In the 1930s, most of the country continued down the path of not really worrying about getting ready for war, even when it became obvious we should. Then we had a fantastic period of bravery and commitment in the World War II era, but as soon as it was over, we stopped bothering to worry about the military again. And lo and behold, we had some great successes on the diplomatic front. We had some great successes on the economic front. We had the underpinnings of the creation of the NATO alliance, of a lot of the economic and trade regimens that led to a half-century of global economic expansion. But in that same period, in the late 1940s, we decided that war was more or less not an issue, not a concern, and lo and behold, we were not ready for Korea. So we tend to make a mistake or two in any given period of time. And I can continue this kind of spirit of motivating